I've always felt alone in the world, avoiding interactions with others, but my husband supported me. With him, I believed I could surely find happiness. However, he changed after we got married. Starting with yelling, progressing to shoving, and eventually even kicking me through the blankets when I was sick. This isn't the man I knew. Love has turned into fear. I want to run away, but I'm afraid to do that too. But I have to tell him myself in the end. Please, let's get a divorce. My name is Annabelle, 29 years old. I've been a stay-at-home wife for 2 years with my husband, David. I lost my parents when I was young, and the grandma who raised me passed away when I was in high school. I was, essentially, all alone in the world. After my grandma's death, I became hesitant to interact with people, simply because the pain of losing someone was too much. That's why I never had a boyfriend or close friends, living mostly in solitude. But the person who changed that for me was my current husband. I have no clue what he saw in the gloomy me, but he asked me out on dates many times. Even when I declined, he persisted, to the point of being bothersome. Yet, eventually, I gave in to one of those dates, and before I knew it, he became the most important person in my life. That's how we got married 2 years ago, but now, I'm contemplating whether I should continue this marital life or not. Because David changed after our marriage. A few months into our married life, David started coming home less often. He wouldn't inform me about his return times, and he'd suddenly come home only to complain about what I was doing. "Why haven't you prepared dinner for me?" When I told him I thought he'd be late again, he sighed and looked at me with cold eyes. "You're living off my money, playing housewife, and you can't even handle the chores. What a great wife you are." Saying that, he took his clothes and left the house immediately. After such episodes happened multiple times, I started preparing dinner even if I wasn't sure he'd be back. But ironically, those would be the times he wouldn't return for a week. Did he get tired of me? Did he start seeing aspects of our marriage he disliked? I couldn't help but ponder these thoughts daily. I don't want to believe that the memories of the kind man I married are false. I don't want to be abandoned, I don't want to be alone, and my mind is in chaos. This kind of life went on for half a year, making me realize that something had to change. I didn't want to be a burden to David. Also, we can't even be called a couple in our current state. So, when David came home after a long absence, I asked him if he was considering a divorce. He widened his eyes, looking surprised. "That's not it, Annabelle. It's just that work has been hectic lately. I've been so busy and overwhelmed. I'm sorry for the cold words the other day. Just, please, don't say such things." In his panic, David hugged me for the first time in months. I hadn't realized his work was that demanding and felt somewhat guilty. But without him communicating, I can't understand his challenges. I asked him to keep in touch regularly and to share if anything bothers him in the future. "Of course, I promise," he said with a smile. Seeing my husband's smiling face, I felt relieved for the first time in a while. For some time after that, life went smoothly, as if all my past worries were lies. Though there were days he didn't come home, he always kept in touch. That alone started to make me happy. However, on our first wedding anniversary, he canceled our plans last minute. He didn't show up at the restaurant we had booked. I was truly shocked. I thought he'd never cancel our anniversary dinner. The reason, of course, was work. It's work, so it can't be helped, I tried to tell myself, but I was hurt. I wish he would have told me a bit earlier. When my husband returned the next day, I told him this, only for him to glare at me. Why would you say that? Don't you see how hard I'm working? I'm grateful he's working for us. But I wished he'd made our anniversary special. When I expressed this, he knocked a dish off the table. The sound of the broken dish echoed throughout the room. You're such a selfish woman. That's disappointing. Did you never intend to support me? You're just another gold digger, aren't you? My MIL had started her own company, and both my husband and his brother worked for her. Because of this, many thought of him as the future CEO, and many women after his wealth approached him. Something he'd told me about when we started dating. Only Annabelle truly came to love me, he said with joy in his voice. I remember him saying that with such happiness. Even now, I've never once thought about his family's wealth. When I expressed that, he looked at me with skeptical eyes. If that's true, then work. Is it because you're bored that you complain about my actions? If you truly love me, you'd be able to, right? I wondered if me working would solve the issue. Still, I nodded in agreement to his words. I didn't want him to see me as a gold digger, and more than that, I didn't want to lose him. Maybe my mindset was becoming skewed over time. I started to believe that his anger was because of some wrong I had done. Soon, I found a full-time job and started working. By tidying up before heading to work and after coming home, he had no complaints about household chores. Living like this, almost like I was alone, I received a call from my MIL one day. Annabelle, I heard you're working now. Weren't you supposed to quit your job after getting married? To my MIL's query, I just responded with a wry smile. I had some free time. My MIL has always been kind to me since our first meeting. Although she's a busy CEO and we only meet a few times a year, she's always shown concern and care. I vividly remember our shopping trip right after getting married. She looked at me with such joy, like a dream had come true. I didn't ask for details, but apparently, my husband once had a sister. However, she tragically passed away in an unfortunate accident. Maybe that's why my MIL has been extra kind to me, her daughter-in-law. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Touched by my kind MIL's words, I felt tears well up as I responded. I don't remember my parents, but maybe this is what having a mom feels like. Thinking about it warmed my heart. I didn't want to be a burden to my MIL. Supporting her son, my husband, is my duty. But, how do you support a husband who never comes home? Ever since I started working, he hasn't given me money for living expenses. Sure, I can get by, but is this really okay? The more I pondered, the more I realized my worries hadn't changed over time. Things remain the same. Maybe something needs to change. One evening, David, my husband, came home after a long while. Did you say something to Mom? When I told him about the call, he seemed annoyed at first. But knowing I hadn't shared much, his face relaxed. That's why you're my wife. Make sure you tell her we're doing great, okay? I questioned whether we were truly doing well. Thanks to your adjustments, I can focus on my role as the future CEO. I'll pamper you once you're the CEO's wife. His words, expecting me to be pleased, saddened me. I never wished to be a CEO's wife. All I wanted was a happy home with David. That would have been enough. As I expressed this, I felt a sharp pain on my cheek. David had slapped me. I'm working hard, and you dare say that. You should be grateful I married you. Just do as I say. This wasn't the David I knew. Tears streamed down my face. I cried, but he seemed only more irritated. "Wake me up when dinner's ready," he grumbled, heading straight to the bedroom. I made dinner through tears that night. We ate in silence. The food tasted of nothing. Then began my days of torment. Maybe my MIL said something, because he started coming home more, but he was colder than ever. I thought about leaving him, but would he agree to a divorce? I wasn't sure, and I feared he might hit me again. He had jabbed and lightly kicked me since then. Now, if he yells or raises his hand, I flinch uncontrollably. He made me quit my job, even though it was his idea. Was it just to torment me? I had no idea what he wanted from me. All I tried to do was avoid making him angry. In the midst of all this, he invited me to his mother's birthday party. "People are coming, so don't embarrass me," he said. "Visit the hairdresser and wear something decent on the day." Amongst all the pain, this event seemed like a rare joy. I held on to the thought of seeing my MIL as a lifeline. But, on the day, I came down with a high fever. I've got a fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit. It might rise, and I can't go to your mom's. Predictably, he exploded in anger. "Of all times to get sick. You're so useless." Apologizing over and over, he kept kicking me through the covers. "I'm going ahead. Get ready and come over." Even with the fever, he pressed me to come. "I can't in this condition." Ignoring my weak protest, he stormed out. Who knows what he'd do if I didn't go? I tried to put on makeup and fix my hair, but everything was slow. My head felt so dizzy. Before I realized, an hour had passed since he left. Impatient, he called. "Enough is enough. Get over here for the celebration now." Trying to embarrass me, I quickly hailed a cab and arrived at my in-laws' house, thinking this might save me from further scolding. But upon arriving, the relatives and guests looked at me with disbelief. "Annabelle, your appearance." Even my MIL, noticing me, had a look of astonishment on her face. Catching my reflection in a large mirror, I saw my makeup and hair were a mess. The word ragged best described my current state. I tried apologizing to my MIL, who looked at me coldly and sighed with exasperation. "Annabelle, you should leave my son." To which David gleefully jumped in with, "Cut her some slack, Mom." LOL. It was just a bit of oversleeping. She forgot about your birthday too. His so-called defense made me hang my head in shame. Suddenly, there was a loud slap. I looked up to see my MIL had slapped David. "What? Why?" With a face full of disbelief, David stared at his mother. "David, you forced Annabelle to come, didn't you? She looks so unwell. Is that how a person should behave?" David tried to retort, but before he could open his mouth, he received another slap. "I have evidence of your affair. We'll have a thorough discussion about this." With that, David was led by his mother into the study. I was shown to the guest room by my brother-in-law and took a moment to rest. Perhaps due to the medication or the accumulated fatigue, I drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, it was evening, and there sat David, seated formally, and my disapproving MIL. Noticing me, she proceeded to briefly explain the situation. My husband apparently had a relationship before we got married and planned to marry that woman. But she had sticky fingers, and during a visit to my MIL's house, She reportedly stole something and left. Of course, my MIL banned him from bringing her over and said she wouldn't provide any support if they married. So, David chose me as a cover. The reason was I looked like his late sister, and he thought his MIL would like me. He believed that if I was favored, he wouldn't be treated poorly. While my MIL didn't tell me everything, I bet David also thought my quiet nature was easy to exploit. David planned to divorce you once he became the CEO. I only met Annabelle a few times a year, but every time I did, she seemed less lively, right? So, I took it upon myself to investigate what was going on between David and Annabelle. And this is what I found. I'm really sorry for my son's behavior. With the MIL story, everything clicked for me. From the beginning, David never loved me. But more than shock, I felt vindicated. I had been thinking of leaving too. What might have been love turned to fear every time he yelled or raised his hand. Mael, I'm leaving him. Hearing this, my MIL nodded. David, you better pay her alimony. And sign this divorce paper and this pledge. Reading the pledge my MIL handed over, lose my job. And $50,000 in alimony. Are you kidding? As David was about to argue, he turned to me in desperation. I truly loved you, Annabelle. It's just that my ex wouldn't leave me alone. I didn't know what she might do if I didn't see her. I met her only to protect you, Annabelle. Please believe me. David was in tears. But I knew they weren't for me. I have a bruise from where you kicked me this morning. I can go to the hospital right now and get a medical report, you know. If you don't want to get sued, sign the papers. It seemed even my mother-in-law didn't know about the abuse. She kicked David out while crying. You're absolutely no good. Don't you dare cross our threshold again. We're done with you. After that, David's younger brother stepped in between my mother-in-law and David. Crying, David signed the papers. I can't help but think, if you regret it this much, why did you do it in the first place? But maybe this happened because I kept tolerating it. I promised myself never to disregard my feelings again as I watched my crying husband. After our divorce, I had busy days preparing to move and looking for a new job. But my brother-in-law helped me with finding a new place, and my MIL even introduced me to a company she knew. I got a job in the same industry as before and received an offer recently. Of course, I had a proper interview, so I don't think it was just through connections. But ever since then, my MIL has been a bit overprotective, which worries me. Starting a new life while working at a new place will be tough for a while. But right now, I feel more satisfaction and relief than anxiety. About a year after our divorce, I unexpectedly ran into David near my workplace. I just wanted to talk for a bit. He looked pale, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had lost his old spark. To cut a long story short, he wanted to get back together after being dumped by his girlfriend. I couldn't help but laugh. Then I showed him my hand. On my right ring finger was a ring I had just received. I've been seeing your brother recently. I don't know if we'll get married or not. But I know he's way better than you. Plus, he's going to be the next CEO. David always assumed he'd be the next CEO just because he was the elder son. But his mother never considered him due to his irresponsible behavior. My life with you was tough. But there's one thing I'm grateful for. Thank you for introducing me to your family. They've been so good to me, I said with a smile. David just collapsed right there. He kneeled and started sobbing. I realized then how glad I was to be rid of him. With David still in the picture, I can't think of remarrying yet. But I've decided to trust the people who supported me during my toughest times. This time, I'll live true to my feelings.